All right, so today we're going to talk about Steve Jobs, the 2015 Danny Boyle film starring Michael Fassbender, the Steve Jobs biopic, which kind of crashed and burned. This is a film which had been in production for years, had many a director kind of come and go. It was the film that was going to be the new Citizen Kane. It was the biggest thing. And it started a limited release, a limited word-of-mouth release, trying to build up that positive word-of-mouth. And the word-of-mouth was pretty universally bad. It got very bad word-of-mouth. And despite the critics and the fanboys licking Aaron Sorkin's ass, and all of that stuff, in spite of all of the goodwill from the critics and stuff, it was a film that was just rejected by the audience. It was 4 years since the death of Steve Jobs in late 2011, so the interest had kind of cooled off. I think the historical accuracies ultimately kind of killed the film, and it's in many ways a very admirable film. I mean, I think from a structural standpoint, it's very interesting, but I think there's some problems that I have with the film, and it really energized me to do some more videos on this channel. Actually, I was real excited to talk about it. So, Steve Jobs, what is the movie about? The movie is about the life of Steve Jobs. It's not a conventional biopic, though. It's not. I mean, just after Steve Jobs died, Ashton Kutcher kind of rushed out a little independent biopic on the life of Steve Jobs, just simply called Jobs. I believe that was released in 2013. And that's more of a conventional biopic where we see the beginning of Steve Jobs and his youth and going through college and as a dropout, and then his relationship with Wozniak, and then the formation of Apple and the continuing, and so that's more of a conventional narrative. The Aaron Sorkin's written Steve Jobs movie, directed by Danny Boyle of Trainspotting and Slumdog Millionaire and what have you. The Steve Jobs movie basically is structured in these kind of three submersible units, these three kind of bottle pieces, these chamber pieces, almost like a play. Three product launches in the life of Steve Jobs. We started in 1984 with the original Macintosh launch. Then we flash forward to 1988 with the release of the Next computer. Well, Steve Jobs, after he left Apple, he formed this company called Next, which was the goal was to produce these educational computers, and he designed this Next Cube, which was like the Ferrari, the Porsche of modern computing, and these black magnesium cube, beautiful, very, very, very expensive. So we have the original Macintosh, the Next computer, and then we flash forward into the late 90s, into 1998, with the release of the original iMac, after Steve Jobs had come back to Apple. We see we don't see the product launch itself. We see everything behind the scenes up to the product launch. We see the constant bustle backstage as our Steve Jobs character, played by Michael Fassbender, walks around and nervously paces while these people are from his past, present, and future confront him, his old girlfriend and his possibly his daughter Lisa, and his boss, the CEO of Apple, John Scully, and then the constant is this character, Joanna Hoffman, played by Kate Winslet. Joanna Hoffman, who was the head of marketing at Apple, and then she moved over to Next, and she came back to Apple. In this film, she feels more like his personal assistant than some kind of head of marketing. She kind of follows him around, and it's like she's like his little conscience, where he talks, "Oh, what about your daughter? Lisa, that's the best thing about you." I'm like, man, why don't you go, check out the newest campaign for our computers? Why are you talking about my daughter? I mean, as much as there, I mean, it's a very interesting structure, a very interesting idea to structure these films. Don't not just tell a kind of a conventional, biopic type of story. As interesting as that idea is, and then Danny Boyle brings to it this kind of visual sensibility, which is very interesting. A signature of Apple is that they had some of the best marketing, some of the best advertising. Of course, the 1984 ad with the directed by Ridley Scott, with the woman, smashing the 1980 the television screen, and the thing blowing up. And then even after that, even after Steve Jobs left Apple, they had the same marketing guys, and they would do these the Apple advertising and their aesthetic in the 80s and the early 90s. It's incredible. It's mind blowing. It's great. And so there is a little bit of that inspiration that I think. Danny Boyle brought into this film, and the fact that it's structured in 3 different time periods, and then it's shot in 3 different formats. The first 1984 is shot in 16 millimeter, and we actually have like a little 16 millimeter like film burn rollout at the end of the segment. And then when we go into the next computer era, 1988, it's 35 millimeter film. So 16 millimeter film, 35 millimeter film, and then we go into the Apple, the Apple iMac launch. It's actually digital video. It's high definition, and then we have it starts with like these little high definition, like distorted, blurred. It's something that is just so subtle that I think maybe the average viewer, might even just miss it. But again, it's just these little things. At the same time, they're elements of this film which seem tragically mediocre. Seem like the same old stuff that you do in any biopic, is that you have characters kind of talking exposition to each other. You have Abraham Lincoln, so now you just freed these slaves and you're going to arrest. Yes, I'm going to the Ford Theater next week, and I'm going to take my wife, and I hope that the guy does not, just like these characters, just la 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 la. You have, Michael Fassbender just like talking a mile a minute, and Joanna Hoffman talking a mile a minute, and they're talking all these little factoids about the Mac has it can't be opened with regular tools. We didn't want to make it tamper proof, and blah 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 blah, and this is that, and these are like real factoids. If you're kind of following along with, okay, this is real stuff, but it's not really how people talk. It's maybe how Aaron Sorkin characters talk, But it just seems real ridiculous. And then and then I really doubt the historical accuracy of some of this stuff. Like, I mean, the 1984 Mac segment. Okay, first of all, we're introduced to Joanna Hoffman and Steve Jobs, and then we're introduced to the main part of this film, which is not Steve Jobs the creator, but Steve Jobs the deadbeat dad. Steve Jobs, who is a broken, emotionally, shattered character who is brilliant, but la la la, and this and that, and he, all of this stuff, which is very, very debatable. I mean, the Steve Jobs character in Steve Jobs is a very nasty guy. He's a guy who will tell a little girl that, oh no, the computer isn't named after you, and just mean stuff. I don't even think the real Steve Jobs would do something like that. Mean stuff. He's just a mean guy throughout. I don't think that the end makes him redeemable or anything. I just see this character as a, and it's difficult for me to, the character of Steve Jobs inextricably linked to the real person, and I think the historical inaccuracies kill it, and I mean, the first segment, the 84 Mac segment, the crisis in that 84 Mac segment is that the speech synthesis demo, because what Steve Jobs wants is he wants the computer to say, "Hello, I am Macintosh" on the stage. It's a text to voice synthesizer, and what they do is they can't get it to run on the current Mac, the 128K Mac, which is actually going to be for sale. So what they do is they have to run it on the Mac with the higher amount of RAM, which isn't going to be available for 6 months or a year after the release. And so there's this existential crisis where Steve Jobs, asked the head of marketing if they can do this. And I mean, the fact that that the head of marketing of a company is having an existential crisis whether to lie to customers in a product demo. I think like Batman versus Superman and Lord of the Rings, I think that's I would believe in that stuff happened more so than someone in marketing having this moral existential crisis over whether to lie to customers in a product demo. That's probably one of the silliest when you really think about it. I mean, it's very smart characters talking all this jargon, but when you really break down what's happening in the scene, I think that's probably the funniest shit I think I've ever seen in a film. For a while, and I don't even know if that's true. I don't know. There are so many things in this film that are so many details that are compressed and distorted and changed, and people meeting people that just it didn't happen. It's totally bullshit. At the very end, the iMac that Steve Wozniak is not jumping up like a heckler and saying, "What about the Apple II team? What about the Apple?" I mean, it's 98, dude. The Apple II was toast by what, 1990, 1991? I mean, people were still using it, but I mean, he's not shouting from the halls like some fucking heckler. I mean, come on, dude. Who the fuck would even write that? That didn't even happen. It's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. I mean, And then there's the 1988 sequence where Wozniak is showing him his Nixie watch. I don't even think that Nixie watch even existed until like 2001, 2002. It's now that the current 2000s Steve Wozniak, he has this Nixie watch. So we got to put it back into like 1988. No, it's not historically accurate. I think this whole thing about historical accuracy, it reminds me of something that the special effects makeup artist Tom Savini's always talked about, anatomically correct gore. I mean, anybody can make a cut-off head and they can just throw some latex and blood around and just do that. But Tom Savini, his background, he did the special effects for Dawn of the Dead and Friday the 13th and, all of these kind of seminal horror films, Day of the Dead, of course. And what he said is that he's a Vietnam War vet and he took pictures in Vietnam. He was a photographer, and he actually saw people blown up and dying and dead bodies. And so when he does a cut off head or something, the idea of going into medical books and researching what the vein structure really looks like and what, if you cut off a head, what it might really look like, it affects an audience because when they look at it, they go, that's real. It affects you on some level. The audience, there's a connection to it. That the audience is maybe smarter on a much deeper level. They can sense when something is real, when a narrative is real, when the plot is real. And I think Steve Jobs, there's so many historical inaccuracies that I think even if you're not familiar with Steve Jobs or you're not familiar with all this stuff, it just strikes a very false chord, And I just can't help but just think of it, man. It's just not. I mean, historical inaccuracies and the fact that Michael Fassbender doesn't really look anything like Steve Jobs, you know. He looks nothing like Steve Jobs. I mean, I'm sorry. You can put the glasses on him, you can do the hair, you can do the, but he doesn't look like the guy, okay? He doesn't look like the guy. It would be fine if Steve Jobs was somebody that nobody ever saw. But we studied him for, as I said, for over a decade in these product launches, these iconic product launches of the iMac and the iPhone. You can go on YouTube, you can see them, you can see all of these 30 to 45 minute, hour plus launches where this guy is demonstrating these products, you know. So we know what he looks like. We know what he looks like big time. You can't hide that. You gotta have somebody who more than, I mean, I think the original actor, you know, Christian Bale, who was gonna, I think Christian Bale would have been a perfect choice. Really looked like Steve Jobs in some ways. I think even DiCaprio was another guy that was you know, going to be in this film. I thought, oh man, maybe that even. I mean, I don't know. But no, Fassbender is good. Fassbender had the voice down. To his credit, Fassbender really got the voice down. Ashton Kutcher really didn't get the Steve Jobs voice down. Ashton Kutcher looks incredibly like Steve Jobs, eerily. I mean, like, I think if you even put a picture of Steve Jobs next to some of the recreated Ashton Kutcher photos of Steve Jobs, maybe I think a lot of average people would have a difficulty telling them apart. He looks so good. He got the walk with the way Steve Jobs walked and the balls of his feet and kind of had that weird kind of bounce thing, which if you study Steve Jobs, he really did that. Fassbender really didn't do that. You know, he didn't need to do that. You know, he's just a different looking guy, and it really worked. I mean, Joanna Hoffman, Kate Winslet is Joanna Hoffman. Her fluctuating accent, which many people, she don't have an accent. Blah, blah. It's a problem. It's an issue. Okay, in the 1984 Macintosh segment, Joanna Hoffman sounds like an American. Then she goes into the right from the beginning of the 88 next sequence. She's she's got the heavy Polish accent. I wonder if it was shot out of sequence. If the 1988 sequence was shot and she was doing that heavy accent, so it's like, man, maybe you should lighten it up. And then they do the 84. Because Joanna Hoffman was apparently a Polish immigrant, and that's where the accent comes from, and so I guess that's something that Kate Winslet was trying to add. Then some immigrants, when they go to America, they lose their accent. It seems like Joanna Hoffman in this film was in the reverse. In 84, between 84 and 80, she like gains it back, you know. And who the fuck knows who Joanna Hoffman is and what the fuck Joanna Hoffman looks like? Who the fuck cares? You could do Joanna Hoffman, you could give her a fucking Boston accent. Nobody would fucking know. Nobody fucking cares. There's fucking, what point is that she's a Polish immigrant? That doesn't even fucking, what, I mean, if we're going to start playing Fantasyland and have these fictional characters and these fictional meetings between real people saying fictional shit, why the fuck just cut the fucking accent out? I mean, Jesus Christ. It's called acting. And, I mean, yeah. I mean, the historical inaccuracies of the film, you know, I mean, I think David Fincher would have done something with it, you know. I mean, David Fincher had a great time doing The Social Network from another Aaron Sorkin. And I mean, I love Aaron Sorkin, man. I mean, I think he's fucking brilliant, you know. I mean, A Few Good Men is fucking brilliant, and The Social Network was great, you know. Fincher wanted, you know, things. Fincher wanted his $10 million fee. He wanted a $45 million budget. He wanted total control of marketing. They didn't want to do that, and so he went away, and the film is what it is. And I mean, there is some good parts of the film. I mean, I think the relationship between Steve Jobs and Lisa, this kind of emotional through line throughout the film, I mean, I think that's good. But I mean, again, And in the '88 the accusation that the reason that Steve Jobs built this and terribly expensive Next computer in 1988 would be so that in 1987 the Next would be bought by Apple and that he would come back to Apple. I find that kind of ridiculous, and I don't think that there's anything to really support that idea that was the reason why he was building this computer, was as just kind of a dodge. I think Steve Jobs at that point, toward the end of the 80s, had a lot of stuff going on in his life. He had Next, he had Pixar that was just about to come to him. He had a lot of stuff going on. I think the last thing on his mind was a coup on Apple, or I mean, I don't know. I just don't. That whole thing just rang so fucking false to me. That struck me as just such an invention, And there's so many things in a lot of these films. It just felt like a really lame, weak invention, and there were a lot of things. Because that's, in this film, in this film, just like in the Kutcher movie, Jobs is a messiah. Jobs is like, there's that scene in Jobs, the Ashton Kutcher film, where Steve Jobs, at Kutcher's Jobs, is fucking around with his portable CD player. He's like, I think the batteries are dying. I'm going to do something, and it's like, Eureka in the bathtub. Steve Jobs invents the iPod, The story of the iPod was with Tony Fadell and these guys at Apple who had found a manufacturer that had these tiny little hard drives, and like, what can we do with that? We can put that little hard drive in a little portable media player, and so a lot of that was kind of kismet and didn't have a lot to do with Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was the guy who saw an opportunity, saw an opening. And maybe it wasn't the first, maybe Apple didn't develop the first MP3 player, but they developed the best one, the one that just blew up the world, But in this film, also in the Danny Boyle Steve Jobs movie, it's also like, he tells Lisa, I'm going to have 1,000 songs in your pocket, watch out, we're going to do it, And I don't even think that the iPod was in development in 1998, Again, ridiculous stuff. I mean, I still think, for my money, the best Steve Jobs and the best Bill Gates movie was that 1998 TNT television movie, The Pirates of Silicon Valley, with Anthony Michael Hall and Noah Wyle as Steve Jobs. I thought Noah Wile's performance of Steve Jobs was just, even to this day, it's just so, it captures, I think Noah Wyle has enough of a vague resemblance to Steve Jobs, and he was able to embody, I think more so than Fassbender or Kutcher, really, though Kutcher really looks like Steve Jobs. Neither of them really have the charisma of Steve Jobs. The opening of Pirates of Silicon Valley, where it's a very, very clever opening, where it's supposedly Steve Jobs talking to the camera, saying, I don't want you to think about this as just a movie. This is about expanding the consciousness. This is about da-da-da. And then we pull around and we realize he's not talking to us, the viewer. He's actually talking to Ridley Scott, who's shooting the 1984 commercial. Clever. The use of music in Pirates of Silicon Valley, if you just go through it and see specifically the Moody Blues, there are Moody Blues tracks from the Question, the Moody Blues track, all throughout the film with different parts in the Moody Blues career, and the very, very. I think if you haven't watched that movie in a while, it's a clever movie. And again, it takes its liberties just like any of these movies, but it feels like it captures the feeling of the time in a way that Steve Jobs definitely doesn't do, and in a way that really the Jobs film didn't quite do. that movie is great. And then, of course, there's Revenge of the Nerds, the Robert Cringely PBS documentary, which is so cool. And really kind of, that was really what Pirates of Silicon Valley was based on. But really, and then it was so good. I mean, Noah Wyle was, Steve Jobs brought Noah Wyle into a product launch. He brought him into one of the Apple product launches and on stage. It was so cool. I mean, it became for a couple of years there, just an iconic thing. Noah Wyle as Steve Jobs. It was really good. It was really good. Much better, I think, than the Talking Heads and the stuff that it's like it just makes you. It doesn't really communicate to the audience what was so special, what was so great about Steve Jobs, this film, or really Jobs. Neither of these two films really communicate what was really great about Steve Jobs. What really excited people. It wasn't the deadbeat dad. It wasn't all of this. It wasn't this kind of multi-dimensional portrait of a character and all of this bullshit that could be anybody or any other fictional character or whatever. It was something more. So thumbs down to Steve Jobs. Kind of this to the Ashton Kutcher Jobs movie. I'll just give it a this because it's got the historical accuracy, and at least Ashton Kutcher vaguely looks like Steve Jobs, and they don't have people with like rotating accents. Seth Rogen, I guess, is a good Wozniak. I guess I'd like to, if I was in a movie, I'd rather have Seth Rogen versus Josh Gad to portray me, but he's a little bit of a whiner in this movie. I don't think I don't think the real Wozniak is that much of a whiner, And again, the whole, some people I play the orchestra, that's my thing, blah, 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 just all of this bullshit. Spare me the corny fucking made up fucking bullshit. Just the real life. I mean, to me, the writers who do the great biopic stuff, two guys that I really think have been doing some incredible bang-up biopics, Scott Alexander and Larry Karaszewski, guys who wrote the Ed Wood, who wrote Man on the Moon, and the new O.J. Simpson miniseries. I mean, those guys are like uber talented. People versus Larry Flint, and I think that they have a certain respect for the real life, the stuff that really happened, and there's very little, I think, of course, in any movie, you've got to compress characters and events, and you have to make life make sense, of course. But at the same time, I think there's something special going on in those films that is not in something like Steve Jobs, which is, I think, to me, it's neither fish nor fowl, because it's trying to be like a conventional mainstream biopic, but then it has this radical structure to it, where it almost felt like, this film almost feels like a kind of a fever dream, like somebody on IMDb actually pointed this out, that it almost feels like the dying memories of Steve Jobs just pulsing through his synapses as he's dying, just kind of flashing back and forth between parts of his life and editing and changing, and it also could be just seen as this very kind of stylized portrait of somebody's life, that if you'd had it bookended by these really stylized sequences maybe, and just made a point to the audience, because I think, to me, this film has less to do with a traditional biopic and more something like Paul Schrader's Mishima, where it's like a life in so many chapters, It reminded me of Mishima almost, it almost reminded me of, like, maybe there should have been scenes where Steve Jobs, walks into this black room and it starts getting real weird and heavy, and out there. So I think that was another problem, is that it feels like, oh, they're trying to make a feel-good Oscar-winning film, but then they're doing this radical structure and all this bullshit, just kind of fucking with that. They're making this, making it very, have a limited appeal, but the limited appeal guys are like, hey, this is bullshit. The nerds are going like, hey, this is way, way, way historically inaccurate. So it's like, who is the audience that this appeals to? I think that was the message that was lost between when, how many millions and millions went, that Sony bought this film, and then it went to Universal, and then it went through all these directors and all of this money, and the message got lost of let's make a good movie. Anyway, I think I'm just gonna. It was the most frustrating experience I've had for a while. It's like so many talented guys, so many stuffed shirts, so many brilliant guys basically taking tens of millions of dollars and pulling utter defeat from the jaws of victory. That is a Steve Jobs movie. And they did it with like that English dude who made Pirates of Silicon Valley, did it with like fucking what, $2 or $3 million in 1999. Did it with shit probably. He made it with fucking some TV actors and some 80s Brat Pack actor. He made this fucking movie that's 20 times better than Steve Jobs. God damn, great. Who was that guy? Who was the guy who directed Pirates of Silicon Valley? Who was that guy? I want to talk about Martin Burke. Yeah, Martin Burke was great. And what else has Martin Burke done? He's not done a lot of anything. Martin Burke did a great job. So anyway, I think that's about it. Steve Jobs, not that great. Pirates of Silicon Valley is really great. So that's it.